Meanwhile, Cathay Pacific has suspended flights to and from Wuhan. The airline said the decision would be effective from tomorrow until February the 29th, adding that it is monitoring the situation closely and will continue to work with Hong Kong's health authorities. So we're seeing company take action now on back of coronavirus. I want to bring in Matthias Cormann, the finance minister from Australia. Thank you very much.
Good to be here.
And on the sidelines of Davos here, one of the concerns that actually has emerged is that of a health risk, a serious health risk in your part of the world, Asia-Pacific region, on back of coronavirus. We see the number of cases picking up overnight. Are you beginning to think about potential contingency plans now?
Well, I mean, obviously we have got established processes in place to monitor any of these sorts of threats, and the usual processes apply as they always would.
Okay, so you're monitoring the situation very closely,
Indeed.
seeing if it gets worse. Taking you to another topic, of course, very important topic for the region, that is of the signing of the U.S. and China Phase 1 trade deal. Are you happy to see that happen?
Well, absolutely. I mean, as we were meeting in Davos last year, there was a lot of concern around the world, and indeed the level of trade tensions between the US and China has significantly weighed on global growth all throughout 2019. So we welcome that development. Obviously, there's still more work to be done, but from an Australian point of view, we certainly believe that it's in our interest, as it is in the interest of the US and China and all trading nations around the world, for there to be a sustainable arrangement, accommodation, understanding between the US and China into the future.
And does it pose some upside risk potential to the Australian economy this year, the fact that that deal is signed?
Well, obviously, a resolution of these issues between the US and China will help facilitate stronger global growth, which in turn will help facilitate stronger growth in Australia. And that's good news for us. That will help us create more jobs. And of course, yeah, we welcome that.
I want to take you to a big topic right now in Australia, and obviously the world has been gripped by images of the bushfires, and it's led to a huge amount of devastation. One of the criticisms leveled at your government is that you were slow to respond. What do you say to that?
Well, look, I mean, Australia has established arrangements when it comes to bushfire and emergency responses, but I mean, this particular bushfire season is extreme and severe and unprecedented in its level of devastation, and the Prime Minister has led an unprecedented, historically unprecedented national bushfire response effort. I mean, there's no doubt that when right now our focus is on the emergency response, getting on top of those fires. Some of those fires are still burning, so that's obviously our priority right now. But once we are on the other side of all of this, there will be inquiries and processes to assess how in the future a fire season of this intensity can be responded to in a better fashion.
And indeed, on that point, I mean, there's a view out there that the government actually missed some of the crucial warning signs in anticipation of those bushfires. Can we expect to see a change in climate change policy out of your government?
Well, I mean, so you're raising two different issues. So in terms of climate change, we have a very ambitious climate change policy. We are absolutely committed to effective action on climate change. We are one of only a handful of countries around the world that will not just meet but beat its emissions reduction targets agreed to in Kyoto by 2020. We will beat our emissions reduction targets by 2020 by more than 400 million tons of CO2. And indeed, we are on track to meet and beat our emissions reduction targets agreed to in Paris. And when you consider, we are a large continent with a small population, so considering the emissions reduction targets that we've committed to on a per capita basis, we will be more than halving emissions, and indeed we will be reducing the emissions intensity in our economy by 2/3. That is more ambitious than the UK, than Canada, than New Zealand, than many other countries around the world.
Well, you say that, but also Australia is also a very coal-intensive economy. Yeah. Can we expect to see a phasing out or a reshaping of the narrative around the heavy reliance on fossil fuels in the coal industry?
Well, I mean, we are also the country around the world that leads the world in terms of our investment in renewable energy. On a per capita basis, we invest more than twice as much into renewable energy than Germany, than France, for example, just to name a few. So, I mean, we are absolutely focused on boosting renewable energy. Right now, 25% of our energy supplies in our national electricity market comes from renewables. By 2030, that will be 50%. But coal, not just in Australia, but around the world, will continue to be an important source of base load power. I mean, I was talking to the Indian Trade Minister earlier in the week, who made the point that in order for India to be able to boost the level of renewable energy into their grid, they need access to coal as a base load source. And the question then becomes, in the context of a global demand for coal, do you prefer us to use comparatively cleaner Australian coal with less ash content, less moisture, a higher energy intensity, or the comparatively dirtier coal from other sources? And we would say using cleaner Australian coal actually helps reduce emissions compared to what the situation would be in the alternative.
And of course, it remains to be seen how it works out in the long run. Sir, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me today on Street Signs. And Matthias